share with you. Our guest joining us now is the great Dr. Benjamin Carson. He is author of America the Beautiful. And Dr. Carson, it is an honor and privilege. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I went back and actually looked at some interviews you have done after the State of the Union last year. And I thought, wow, it would be great to get your perspective before the president speaks tonight, knowing that the general themes of what they're going to be, and we hear about less inequality and more on opportunity. What do you believe the government's role is in creating opportunity? And in that belief, how do you think the president is doing in forwarding and creating opportunities?
Well, I'm certainly glad that he has gotten off the income inequality kick and gotten onto the opportunity kick, which is what I and a lot of people have been talking about. The question will be how much sincerity there is. Obviously, the best way that the government can create opportunity is to get out of the way. You know, get your foot off of everybody's neck and let the free economy blossom the way that it has in the past. You know, one of the things that propelled this nation to the pinnacle of the world in record time was the fact that innovation was allowed to reign supreme, and there was very little in the way of interference. And as Thomas Jefferson said, you know, the government saw its responsibility as making sure that people didn't hurt each other and basically staying out of their way. So I think that would probably apply today as well. There's so many regulations. If you talk to people, particularly in small business, and they'll tell you about all the hoops they have to jump through. I have to tell you the number of hoops that you have to jump through in medicine now is absolutely ridiculous, and it's mounting by the day. So, you know, these are not the kinds of things that are conducive to the creation of free enterprise that lifts all boats.
Well, what do you say to those, and I realize your own story, extraordinary, but to those who are oftentimes spoken of in the way of government investments and saying, hey, look, not everybody is born on third base, much less first base. Maybe they haven't even made it to first base. And so economically, we are not equal. And so opportunity, in order to assure that we have opportunity for those who are in need, government needs to step in and provide that through programs like universal pre-K and investments into education overall, college loans, and taking care of that. What do you say to those folks?
I would simply say perhaps the preamble to his speech should be the definition of free enterprise capitalistic system versus the definition of a socialist communist system, and then go on with his remarks and see which one they fit into. You know, what we want to emphasize in our society is providing opportunities, making sure that people are not preventing people from utilizing their God-given talents to rise in the system. And, you know, we want to incentivize people to work hard to achieve the goals that are set before them. By simply supplementing people and making people feel entitled, you know, we're not really doing them any favors. In fact, you know, we're doing them a great disfavor. And in many cases, they don't realize it because they've been mesmerized and almost addicted to aid, which is not necessary for them to have, except in order to put them on the trajectory to self-sufficiency.
How do you deal with what you just mentioned, entitlement in our society? We have the entitlement crisis of being unfunded liabilities, over 60% of the budget, average of $120,000 paid out, then paid in, Social Security and Medicare, and the average. So we can't sustain that. Nonetheless, people are getting it. And if you try to get there politically, you'll be accused of throwing Granny off the cliff. You know that. But bottom line,
Yeah,
how do you cut through that, Dr. Carson?
I think you have to educate people. The problem is, most people in the government don't even understand economics, much less, the average person. They haven't really had any lessons on how things work. And that's why many people think that, $17.5 trillion, that's just a number. It doesn't mean anything. And this is where history comes in. Look at countries like Greece and Ireland and Portugal and Spain. Look at where they were relative to where we are and what happened. The pattern is really quite consistent. And
Doctor, yes, go ahead, please.
Nobody's really teaching those things to the American people.
But the only way to learn that lesson, it seems, is to do what you have talked about with and if I'm misquoting, please correct me, a God-designed tax code that would look like our tithing system in the Christian community. Everybody, go ahead.
Yeah, that would go a long way toward rectifying the situation. A lot of things need to be simplified. We've made things incredibly complex in order to justify the gigantic bureaucracies and the cost, which continues to balloon. The wealthiest part of our nation surrounds Washington, D.C. What does that tell you?
Absolutely. It seems the power has shifted there, and investment and money from New York to there over the last 5 years especially. So as you're determining these problems and explaining it to the rest of us in a way that is not divisive, and that is really amazing. I sit back as a talk show host and in awe and wonder, not patronizing you. I'm saying because of your delivery. I know you've received compliments from people that come up to you from the far left and have actually listened to you. Do we need to be more respectful in the way we present things?
Oh, without question. This tact of driving wedges into every crack is right out of the Saul Alinsky textbook, Divide and Conquer. We need to get away from that. When we talk about fairness, we need to be talking about everybody. We don't need to be picking out a particular class of individuals and saying, well, they've not had good things that happened to them in the past, so let's make them the favorite people. That kind of thing never ends. At some point, somebody has to be the adult, sit down and say, let's look at something that is going to work for all citizens, and let's get input from all citizens. Let's consider what they have to say. Let's not set ourselves up as the great wizard who knows what's best for everybody else.
Have we overstepped in that way, trying to go beyond what God's wisdom is?
Oh, without question. And, we have moved significantly away from the Judeo-Christian values that really allowed this nation to excel and way beyond anything that anybody else has done in record time. And as we kick that out, you can see us decelerating very quickly also.
What do you make of Dinesh D'Souza and high-profile cases of what can seem, at least on the surface, in light of what we've seen politically targeting people that have ideological differences with the current administration? What do you make of that, considering the fact of your own experience with the IRS?
Yeah, well, I think it's detestable. I've had experience with more than just the IRS. I don't want to go into it, but they've come after me, come after family members, come after charitable organizations that I was involved with. I mean, they really try to put the screws to you, but I always say it's God before you, who can be against you. And at some point, people have to be willing to stand up because, you look at Patrick Henry. He said, give me liberty or give me death. Nathan Hale, my only regret is that I have but one life to give for my nation. So, this is the kind of courage that it's going to require to get through the kind of corruption and deceit that is just infesting our system right now and that people have come to be comfortable with. They're complacent with it. This is the problem.
How do you address that by not mention the people that are engaging in that behavior? Because immediately when you do that, some would say, hey, what you're doing is dividing people because you're holding them to account for their actions. Go ahead,
I
please.
think you do that. I think you do that by describing the action without necessarily putting names on it, so that anybody with half a brain could see what you're talking about, and they can see those patterns of behavior, and then they can ascribe them to the appropriate people. That's the way Jesus used to do it. I think that was very wise.
And a great storyteller. He was able to communicate. Obviously, Captain Obvious just joined the conversation. Sorry there, Doctor. Question: when we talk about a society today, a religious society our founders spoke to, are we able to really? Some people have tuned out, and they've said, it's over. I mean, we're really not going to come back from that. Look at society today, where we are. We may have a constitution. Go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of people have said that. I've encountered them, particularly a lot of older Americans who told me that, they had given up on America and they were just waiting to die. But, now they're starting to feel maybe slightly encouraged. And I'm feeling greatly encouraged as I go around the country. I'm speaking to a large group tonight. People wildly enthusiastic, and it's like they come out and they say, you mean I'm not the only one with common sense? You mean I can crawl out from under my rock and not be afraid? Number one rule of Saul Alinsky is you make the majority feel that their opinions are outdated, that nobody thinks that way anymore, and that your opinion is the only way that intelligent people think. And if you can co-opt the media in the process, you're far ahead of the game. Well, they've been quite successful at that. But, we have to expose what they're doing and let the majority of people who actually do have common sense know that they have no reason to be ashamed, no reason to shut up and to capitulate.
If there was one thing you could do at a stroke of a pen or with a phone call, what would it be? And that's everything from repealing Obamacare to changing the tax code. What's the first thing you would do?
Get rid of political correctness. And get people engaged in civil discussion, talking, because we all have to live here. We all should have input. All of our opinions should be valued.
Now, I know you answer this every time you answer it, and you've answered it in the past on your website, but has there been any change in your desire or call to run for President of the United States in 2016?
Yeah, well, I still don't desire to do it now, but I always say I will do whatever the Lord indicates should be done. My hope, obviously, is that someone will come along who will really capture the imagination of the people, somebody who really understands and respects the Constitution, somebody who is articulate and can communicate with people, in which case, I would happily get behind and push such an individual. But ultimately, we have to hope and pray that God will provide the appropriate leadership for this nation, because it will make all the difference in the world.
Dr. Benjamin Carson, it has been a privilege. Thank you, my friend.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Great to be with you. Dr. Benjamin Carson, thoughts on the State of the Union, thoughts on where we are in America. And if you're not inspired by that, well, I don't know what will inspire you. Extraordinary man, extraordinary communicator, and foundation firmly in God. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, proudly on AFR Talk. On the flip side, what would you like to hear in the State of the Union address? We will be taking your calls next. AFR Talk.